Why did they doubt her? Again. Why, after everything she had done, after every mission where she'd proven herself under fire, did the silence at the briefing table feel heavier than the weight of her rifle? Staff Sergeant Nova Martinez sat 2 chairs away from Lieutenant Commander James Vance, the SEAL team leader. His jaw was clenched as if the decision had already been made, as if the words forming in his mouth had nothing to do with facts, records, or skill, but with something else. Something she knew too well. "I want Henderson on overwatch," he said flatly. The operations officer didn't flinch. "Henderson is deployed with another team. Martinez is your sniper." "Then get someone else, anyone else." The words landed like stones. Nova stared at the folder in front of her, keeping her expression blank, though her pulse thudded louder than the wall clock ticking away behind them. She had heard versions of this before, on other deployments, from other men who couldn't see beyond her height, her gender, her braid tied back in regulation neatness. The silence stretched. The ops officer's tone sharpened. "You'll have Martinez, end of discussion." Nova didn't lift her head, didn't respond. She simply noted the slight flicker of disapproval on Vance's face and the way the other SEALs avoided her eyes. In moments like this, she reminded herself of something her father once told her back in Montana. When people don't believe in you, the best answer isn't an argument. It's the work you do after. 12 hours later, she lay flat on her stomach on a ridge deep in the dense forests of Eastern Europe. The M110 rested on its bipod scope glass catching the faintest light, perfectly aligned with her calm breathing. Around her, the forest moved with a rhythm only she seemed to notice. The hush of birds shifting in branches, the occasional stillness where there should have been rustle. Through her scope, the SEAL team moved below. 8 men ghosted themselves in tactical gear, advancing with fluid precision, professional, controlled, unshakable. But she could feel it, something wasn't right. Her radio cracked. Vance's voice was clipped cold. "Ghost, this is 7 Actual, approaching waypoint Charlie. Any movement in your sector?" Nova swept her scope, slow, methodical, her eyes trained to catch details most dismissed, a broken pattern in underbrush, a shadow where it shouldn't be. 7 Actual, this is Ghost. Route is clear, no visible contacts." "Copy," Vance replied. Professional, but there was that undertone, that thread of skepticism she'd heard in the briefing room. Nova exhaled slowly, grounding herself. His trust, or lack of it, was irrelevant. Her job wasn't about his approval. Her job was to see what others couldn't. Minutes passed, the forest quiet except for their advance. Her scope traced their path until movement caught her eye, small, deliberate disturbances in the greenery not far from the SEAL's flank. Then another, opposite side. Then again ahead. She zoomed. Her pulse quickened, but her hand stayed steady. Shadows sliding through the trees with purpose, not random wanderers, fighters. 30 of them. Her chest tightened. A perimeter was forming around the SEALs, closing in with textbook precision. She pressed the radio. 7 Actual, stop movement, immediately. The team froze. "You've got approximately 30 hostiles surrounding your location. They're setting up a kill zone. If you keep moving, you'll be in it." Static, then Vance's voice, thick with doubt. "Ghost, we don't have eyes on any hostiles. Are you certain?" Nova's voice didn't waver. "Affirmative. 30 plus concealed, tightening formation. They're waiting to spring the trap." A pause. She could almost hear his hesitation, the weight of choosing between what he thought he knew and the warning of a sniper he hadn't wanted in the first place. "Ghost," he said at last, "we're not seeing anything. Maintain your position." And then it happened. A deafening blast ripped the valley. One of the SEALs had stepped on a buried pressure plate IED. The explosion lifted dirt, fire, and bodies into the air. Chaos followed, automatic weapons fire from every direction, erupting from the trees, cutting through branches and bark. Nova's breath caught. The ambush had sprung. Contact, contact, we're under heavy fire. Vance's voice was no longer skeptical. It was raw, desperate. Through her scope, Nova saw them pinned behind logs, rocks, the ground itself. The enemy moved like a tide, pressing in, coordinated, overwhelming. 30 fighters, 8 SEALs, wounded already, outnumbered 4-1. Command crackled back, cruel in its coldness. 7 actual, QRF is en route. ETA 45 minutes. Hold your position. No air support, weather grounded. 45 minutes. They wouldn't last 10. Nova's chest burned. She could stay hidden, wait for backup, do what protocol dictated, or... Her voice cut across the chaos. 7 actual, this is Ghost. I'm engaging. Vance snapped back instantly. Negative, Ghost. You're 1 shooter against 30. Stay in position. With respect, sir. Nova's tone was ice over fire. You're about to die if someone doesn't do something. Even as she spoke, she was moving, shifting her rifle, recalculating distances. Her world narrowed to the scope, the breath, the trigger. First target, an enemy with an RPG aimed at the SEAL's cover. Range, 387 meters. Wind, 3 mph east. Slight downward angle. She exhaled, squeezed. The rifle whispered. The man collapsed, the RPG slipping from lifeless hands. 1 down, she murmured to herself. She didn't wait. The scope slid to the next, the machine gunner pinning the SEALs. Range, 412 meters, adjust. Breathe, squeeze. 2 down. Her pulse was steady now, her training taking over, but her chest tightened with something else. Will it be enough? She moved like a ghost along the ridgeline, firing, repositioning, never lingering long enough to be traced. 3 down, 4, 5. The enemy faltered, confusion creeping in. Their fighters dropped without warning, no muzzle flash to track, no sound but the faint cough of her suppressed rifle. Panic spread like cracks in glass. Through comms, Vance's voice broke in, laced with disbelief. Ghost, what the hell are you doing? They're dropping like flies. Doing my job, sir, she replied, eyes locked on her next target. 6 down, 7, 8. Her rifle spoke in whispers, each one a final word written across the battlefield. The SEALs, still surrounded, clung to the possibility of escape, their survival tethered to the unseen sniper above. But in her chest, Nova felt the weight of every shot, not just the kill, but the fragile hope it carried. Because she knew this wasn't just about saving 8 men. It was about proving something larger. That skill had no gender. That the quiet persistence of one underestimated soldier could alter the course of lives. That maybe, just maybe, the forest's deadliest predator wasn't the one who shouted the loudest, but the one no one ever saw coming. How long could she keep this up? How many shots before the enemy realized what was happening, before one mistake exposed her position? Nova's cheek pressed against the rifle stock, the faint smell of oil and earth mixing as she shifted her angle. Below, the forest was a nightmare. The SEALs clung to fractured cover, pinned by relentless bursts of automatic fire. Muzzle flashes danced through smoke, and the air cracked with each round that snapped past bark and flesh. 7 actual to control, multiple wounded. We are combat ineffective without support. Vance's voice was raw with urgency. Control's reply was merciless. 7 actual negative, QRF still 40 minutes out. Hold your position. 40 minutes, an eternity. Nova's heart clenched. She didn't think in terms of minutes, she thought in lives. They had maybe 10 before the enemy overran their position. Her scope locked onto another fighter, this one crawling forward with a grenade launcher. He was close, too close to the SEAL's defensive ring. She calculated quickly. Range, 402 meters. Trees obscured half his body, but his shoulder was exposed, the launcher steadying. She squeezed. The round struck. His body jerked violently, the launcher clattering uselessly to the forest floor. Another 1 down, she whispered, though no one heard. The enemy faltered again. They shouted, ducking, their formation strained by invisible hands. Fear began to creep into their voices, and fear, Nova knew, was a weapon all its own. But fear wasn't enough. There were still too many. She pressed her comms. 7 actual, the enemy is breaking on your western flank. Push that direction, you can punch through. Vance barked back. We've got 3 wounded who can't move fast. We can't leave them. Nova scanned, her pulse steady even as her chest tightened. Then the other 5 provide covering fire. I'll keep them suppressed. Move on my mark. You'll be exposed, Vance said sharply. Not for long. She didn't wait for his permission. Some choices weren't about orders. They were about survival. Mark in 3, 2, 1, move. The SEALs responded instantly, their discipline never wavering even in chaos. 5 of them rose, firing controlled bursts, while 2 dragged the most critically wounded toward the western edge. Another limped, blood soaking his pant leg. The enemy surged, sensing weakness, trying to cut off the breakout. Nova shifted, finding her next target. A fighter popped up from behind a fallen log, AK spitting fire toward the dragging SEALs. Nova exhaled, squeezed. He dropped before he ever saw her. 12 down. Another ran forward, rifle raised. Her shot took him mid-stride. 13. The air was thick with gunpowder and screams, but her breathing was slow, measured, each exhale the rhythm of life and death. She became the still point in the storm, her mind narrowing to angles, distances, adjustments. Her rifle spoke again, 14. Again, 15. The forest began to turn. What had been a slaughter waiting to happen was shifting into something else entirely, panic on the enemy's side. They fired wildly into the trees, desperate to locate the phantom tearing them apart. Every muzzle flash gave away another position, another chance for Nova to strike. Through her scope, she saw their officer appear, shouting, pointing, trying to rally his men. He raised his arm to signal a charge. Nova centered the reticle on his chest. Range, 434 meters. Slight left-to-right wind, she squeezed. The officer crumpled, 16. The enemy's cohesion shattered. What began as an organized ambush devolved into fractured pockets of resistance. Some fired blindly into the trees. Others bolted deeper into the forest, their courage collapsing under the weight of unseen death. Vance's voice came back, but this time it was different, rough but edged with awe. Ghost, I don't know how you're doing this, but keep it up. She didn't answer. Words were distractions. Her job was the work. The SEALs pressed westward, dragging their wounded. Nova moved with them, not physically but with her eyes, her barrel tracking the threats that closed in on their path. She shifted position twice, crawling silently along the ridge, adjusting her vantage point so her shots cut down angles the enemy hadn't considered. She whispered numbers under her breath, 17, 18, 19, as each target fell. She no longer thought about the faces, the individual lives she ended. She thought about the men below, alive only because she refused to let hesitation steal her aim. Still inside her chest, a small voice stirred. How many more until they break completely? How many until I make the mistake that ends me? But the voice was buried beneath something stronger, determination. The SEALs broke through the western edge of the kill zone. Nova's suppression carved a path, each shot like a guiding hand, pushing them forward. By the time the last man crossed into cover, she had logged 21 kills. 7 actual, she said calmly, though her throat was dry. Enemy forces are collapsing. Keep moving to the extraction point. I'll cover. There was silence for a moment, then Vance's reply, his voice no longer cold, no longer skeptical. Copy that, Ghost. The words meant more than he knew. She stayed behind, continuing to hunt. Twice more, fighters tried to regroup for a counterattack. Twice more, she silenced them before they could fire. The forest, once alive with gunfire, grew eerily quiet. The smell of cordite and earth lingered. When at last the SEALs reached the extraction zone, the quick reaction force was there, rotors beating the tree line as medevac crews lifted the wounded. Nova didn't move until the last man was aboard. Only then did she rise from her ridge, rifle slung across her back, legs stiff from hours pressed against the ground. She walked down into the valley, toward the men she had saved. They stared at her as she approached, hardened warriors, bloodied, bruised, and alive. The looks on their faces weren't skepticism anymore. Shock, respect, something like reverence. Vance stepped forward, limping, dirt and blood streaking his face. For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he extended his hand. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology, and I owe you my life." Nova took his hand, her posture steady despite the exhaustion dragging at her bones. "Just doing my job, sir." He shook his head slowly. "No, what you did out there was more than a job. You turned a massacre into an escape. You saved us." The other SEALs gathered, one of them muttering, 15, 20. "How many did you take?" Nova's answer was quiet, "Enough." Because numbers didn't matter, only lives saved did. But deep inside, she knew this moment was more than survival. It was the first crack in the wall that had always stood before her, the wall of doubt, dismissal, disbelief. And though she'd never admit it aloud, that mattered too. The wind stirred through the broken valley, carrying the smoke and the silence of those who had fallen. And somewhere in its whisper, Nova felt a truth settle in her chest. Sometimes the most powerful answer to doubt wasn't anger, wasn't protest. It was performance. And hers had spoken louder than any words ever could. Why was everyone staring at her like that? Nova felt the eyes of 8 hardened operators on her as she stepped into the clearing, rifle slung, boots pressing into the dirt where just minutes earlier fire and blood had ruled. The medevac rotors thundered overhead, the wounded being loaded, but all she felt was the silence from the men who had once doubted her. She had walked battlefields before, crossed kill zones littered with the proof of her aim, but this was different. These weren't faceless Marines she had supported from afar, or patrols she had covered quietly without acknowledgement. These were SEALs, the ones who had looked past her in the briefing, who had dismissed her as a liability, and now they were alive because she hadn't. Lieutenant Commander Vance's hand still lingered in hers from the shake, his grip firm but not forceful. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had never expected: shame. He cleared his throat, the words dragging as if they cost him something. "I was wrong," he said simply, loud enough for his men to hear. "Completely wrong. I didn't want you on this mission and you saved it. You saved us." The SEALs shifted uncomfortably, their faces drawn, dirty, streaked with blood, some their own, some not. One of them, a burly operator with a bandaged arm, broke the tension with a voice that carried gravel. "Sir," he said, looking straight at Vance, "I heard you before the op. Heard you say she'd freeze when the shooting started." Vance didn't deny it, his jaw tightened. "I did." The silence stretched, then he forced himself to look at Nova again. "But I was wrong. You didn't freeze. You didn't falter. You—" his voice caught for a fraction of a second. "You fought like hell for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves." Nova didn't answer. Words weren't her armor. Work was. So she just nodded once, the gesture clipped professional. One of the medics waved for Vance, pointing toward the helicopter. He hesitated, then leaned closer to her. His voice dropped, no longer for the group. "You turned my doubt into a lesson I won't forget. You've got my respect now, Staff Sergeant. More than that, you've got my gratitude." Then he limped away, leaving her standing in the clearing with the echo of his words still hanging. The adrenaline that had carried her through hours of focus was ebbing now, replaced by something heavier. Her muscles ached from the strain of crawling and repositioning. Her shoulders burned from the recoil she had absorbed without pause. But what weighed most wasn't physical. 15, 20. She had lost count somewhere in the blur of it. Each one had been necessary. Each one had meant another breath for the SEALs. And yet, as she watched the helicopters lift off, she felt the familiar shadows settle. How many more before it becomes too heavy to carry? She pushed the thought down. Not now, not here. Survival was its own language, and tonight it had been spoken fluently. Hours later, back at the forward operating base, the air tasted of stale coffee and sweat. Debrief rooms always smelled the same: steel, paper, tension. Nova sat straight in her chair, the weight of her rifle absent for the first time in days, but her back as rigid as if she were still in prone position. The operations officer leaned against the table, reviewing the preliminary reports. His brow furrowed as he scrolled through the ballistic logs. 15 confirmed. Perfect accuracy. Ranges between 280 and 450, all under battlefield conditions. He looked up, almost incredulous. These numbers aren't just good, they're extraordinary. Nova's voice was steady. It wasn't about numbers, sir. It was about keeping them alive. He studied her a moment longer, then exhaled. I've seen seasoned snipers miss under less pressure. What you did today isn't standard performance. He stopped himself, glancing at her, measuring the weight of words. It's going to be noticed. Nova didn't flinch. I'd prefer it not to be, sir. That earned the faintest hint of a smile. You don't get to choose that. What you did is already moving up the chain. The door opened. Vance entered, uniform rumpled, a fresh bandage wrapping his leg. He looked at Nova, then at the officer, and for once, he seemed less like the man who carried command and more like one still trying to reconcile what he'd witnessed. I'm submitting her for the Silver Star, he said bluntly. Nova blinked. Sir. No argument, Vance cut in. You engaged a superior force single-handedly. You saved my team, that's valor. She held his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. I was doing my job. His jaw tightened. No, you were doing more than that. You taught me something I should have already known. He paused, the words heavy with an honesty that didn't come easy. You taught me that capability doesn't come with a gender label. It comes with performance, and you proved it when it mattered. The room stilled. The weight of his admission hung heavier than the award he promised to push. Later, when the formalities ended, Nova stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars fractured above the base lights. She inhaled deeply, the scent of pine mixing with the lingering tang of cordite still clinging to her uniform. For a long moment, she let the silence wrap around her, heavier than the gunfire had been. You saved them, she reminded herself. That's what matters. And yet, her father's voice drifted back, faint but grounding. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself. The rest will follow. She closed her eyes, listening to the hum of generators, the distant voices of soldiers moving through the night. He'd been right all along. The next day, she was summoned to another briefing. She expected another round of questions, perhaps even skepticism dressed up as protocol. Instead, she walked into a room where men in higher ranks than she'd ever seen stood waiting. And among them, a two-star general she didn't recognize until she caught the gleam of her insignia. Staff Sergeant Martinez, the general said, rising as Nova entered. I'm General Patricia Hawthorne, Commanding Officer, Special Operations Forces Command. Nova froze for half a second, then snapped to attention. At ease, Hawthorne said with a faint smile. I've read your reports several times because, frankly, I had to convince myself they weren't embellished. 15 kills, 0 friendly casualties, a SEAL team extracted from a kill zone that should have been their graves. Her eyes sharpened. All achieved while the team leader had specifically requested you not be assigned. The words hung there, sharp as a blade. Nova's throat felt tight. I was just doing my job, ma'am. The general studied her, then shook her head slowly. No, Staff Sergeant, what you did went beyond a job. It was mastery. And in that moment, Nova realized something. What had begun as survival in the forest had turned into something else entirely. The ripples were spreading, up the chain of command, across communities where whispers traveled faster than facts. And those whispers now carried a name. Ghost. Why did the general want to see her personally? That question pulsed in Nova's head as she walked the long, sterile corridor of the forward operating base. Soldiers passed her, some offering nods, others curious glances, but most just moved on with their duties. Her boots struck rhythm against the concrete floor, each step carrying her closer to a room where she knew the air would be heavier, thicker, filled with eyes sharper than any scope. She adjusted her uniform before she entered, rifle left in the armory, braid tight, her posture rigid but calm. A soldier's armor wasn't always steel or Kevlar. Sometimes it was composure. Inside, the room was crowded with rank. Senior officers lined the walls, some familiar, others she knew only from reputation. At the head of the table sat General Patricia Hawthorne, silver hair pulled neatly under her cap, eyes as piercing as any sniper. "Staff Sergeant Nova Martinez," Hawthorne said, rising to greet her. "Thank you for coming." Nova saluted sharply, "Ma'am." "At ease," the general replied, her voice carrying authority without needing volume. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit." Nova obeyed, though every muscle in her body wanted to remain standing. Hawthorne leaned forward, clasping her hands. "I've read the reports, all of them, multiple times. Frankly, I didn't believe them at first. 15 confirmed kills in less than an hour. Precision fire under chaotic conditions. A SEAL team extracted from a kill zone that should have been their graves. And all of it achieved while the team leader had argued against your assignment." The general's gaze didn't waver. "Tell me, Staff Sergeant, how did you do it?" Nova's throat tightened. She had been asked versions of this before, by instructors, by fellow soldiers, sometimes even by herself in the quiet of night. But the answer was always the same. "I did my job, ma'am." Hawthorne studied her, a faint smile tugging at the edge of her lips. "Yes, I've heard that's your answer, but you and I both know it's more than that. Snipers miss, even the best. They get rattled, distracted, or broken under pressure. You didn't." Nova's jaw clenched. "I trained for this, every day. Hours on the range, hours studying the environment. I knew my rifle like I knew my own heartbeat. When it mattered, it was just application." The general tilted her head. "Application? You call what you did application?" She leaned back, her voice softening. "Staff Sergeant, what you demonstrated was mastery, and mastery isn't just about skill. It's about mindset under fire. That's rare, precious. And it's why we're not just here to commend you, we're here to decide what comes next." A ripple of unease moved through Nova's chest. What comes next? She thought she knew the rhythm of her life. Missions, overwatch, silent hunts. Her place was behind the scope, not under lights in a room filled with brass. Recognition had never been her pursuit. She worked in shadows because shadows were where she was most effective. The general's voice cut through her thoughts. "You've applied 3 times for the advanced sniper course. Denied 3 times. Why?" Nova hesitated. She had kept that frustration buried, sealed under professionalism. But here, in this room, evasion felt like weakness. "The official answer was operational needs," she said evenly. "The unofficial answer, according to the course commander I spoke with, was that they weren't sure how a female would handle the pressure." A silence fell over the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, others avoided her eyes. Hawthorne's face hardened. "Unacceptable." She tapped the table once decisively. "That ends now. You're not only going to the advanced sniper course, you're being assigned as an instructor afterward. We need the next generation to learn not just how to shoot, but how to think, to see what others miss, to hold their focus when everyone else is falling apart. That's what you bring, and that's what this community needs." Nova's eyes widened. Instructor. That wasn't what she expected. She had imagined proving herself on more missions, stacking skill against doubt until silence became respect, but training others, being the one others looked to for guidance. Her voice was quiet. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I don't know if I'm qualified to teach." "You're not sure?" Hawthorne's tone sharpened, but not cruelly. "Staff Sergeant, you just saved 8 lives while being actively doubted by the very people you were protecting. You executed sniper operations that even seasoned shooters are calling impossible. And you did it all while carrying the weight of being underestimated. If that doesn't qualify you to teach, nothing does." The words landed heavy. For a moment, Nova felt something stir, something she rarely allowed herself. Pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, she had earned her place. A voice broke her thoughts. "General, if I may." Nova turned. Lieutenant Commander Vance had stepped into the room, his legs still bandaged, his face marked by exhaustion and humility. Hawthorne nodded. "Go ahead, Commander." Vance faced Nova directly. His voice carried weight, though it trembled at the edges. "Martinez, I've submitted a formal request for you to be awarded the Silver Star. What you did wasn't just skill. It was courage. It was selflessness. And it saved 8 lives, including mine." He paused, his eyes locking on hers. "But more than that, you taught me something. You taught me that prejudice isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. I doubted you because of your gender. That mistake nearly cost us everything. You corrected it with every round you fired, and for that, I owe you more than I can repay." He extended his hand again, this time not as a commander to a subordinate, but as a man acknowledging another warrior. "Thank you for saving my team, and thank you for making me a better officer." Nova shook his hand, her voice tight with emotion she tried to bury. "Sir, you were willing to learn. That's what matters." The general leaned forward once more. "Staff Sergeant, you've earned your place, but I won't lie to you, the path ahead will be harder. The advanced course is male-dominated. The instructor ranks even more so. You will face skepticism, resistance, maybe even hostility. How do you intend to handle that?" Nova thought of the forest, the silence before the storm, the birds that had gone quiet, the signs only she had read. She thought of the men bleeding in the dirt, and of how she had chosen not to argue or complain, but to act. Her answer was calm, steady. "The same way I always have, ma'am, by doing my job, by proving my worth through performance, not words, by believing in myself when others don't. The results will speak for themselves." Hawthorne smiled, sharp and proud. "Outstanding answer. Welcome to the Advanced Special Operations community, Staff Sergeant. You've earned your place here. Now go show everyone else what we already know, that excellence has no gender." The meeting adjourned, but the words lingered in Nova's chest. As she walked back across the base, the weight of the day pressed down. Not just the lives she had taken or the ones she had saved, but the knowledge that she was no longer invisible. Her shadows had become spotlight. Her whispers had become echoes. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted that. Because being noticed meant being tested all over again. Still, as she slid her hands into her pockets, her fingers brushed against the sealed trident patch Brick had pressed into her palm before he boarded the helicopter. On the back, the inscription, "To Ghost, the sniper who saved Team 7, with respect and gratitude." She closed her hand around it, grounding herself. Respect had been earned, gratitude had been given. Now came the harder part, carrying it forward. Why did the barracks go quiet when she walked in? Nova paused at the doorway, duffel slung over her shoulder, boots dusted from the long ride back to the States. The air smelled of oil and starch, bunks lined in rigid precision. A dozen eyes turned toward her, men dressed in PT gear or already polishing rifles, their conversations faltering into silence. She didn't need to hear their whispers to know what they were thinking. She had heard them all her career. Too young, too small, too female. But this time, there was something different in their stares. Not just doubt, curiosity, skepticism sharpened by stories already circulating like wildfire. "Ghost," one of them muttered under his breath. She set her duffel down, kept her posture steady. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," she corrected calmly. No one responded. A chuckle somewhere at the back, a whisper too low to catch. The silence filled with judgment she didn't have the energy to fight. Her bunk was at the far end. She claimed it without ceremony, her movements precise, efficient. Every action said the same thing: I belong here. But inside, the weight pressed heavy. This wasn't the forest. This wasn't a battlefield where every shot justified itself. This was a classroom of killers, a proving ground for the best of the best. And here, words mattered as much as rounds. Here, doubt wasn't buried by performance overnight. It lingered, festering in silence, waiting for cracks. The next morning, the course began. Instructors barked orders, their voices cutting through dawn air thick with humidity. They were legends in their own right, men with decades of combat behind them, their reputations etched in scars and records. One of them, a tall sergeant major with a gravel voice, paced in front of the formation. His eyes locked on Nova almost immediately, lingering a second too long. "You're here because you think you're the best," he growled. "But this course doesn't care what you've done before. Every reputation dies at the gate. Out here, you prove yourself all over again." His gaze didn't leave her. The message was clear. The first week was physical. Miles of ruck marches under punishing loads. Timed obstacle courses designed to break muscles and morale alike. Nova's body screamed under the strain, but she didn't falter. She had trained too long, carried too much weight in silence to collapse now. But the stares followed her. Every time she finished a run, every time she scaled a wall, every time she carried her ruck past exhaustion, she felt eyes measuring her differently. If a man stumbled, it was fatigue. If she stumbled, it would be proof. She refused to stumble. The second week was technical. Wind calls, range estimations, environmental factors. Hours behind scopes under instructors who seemed determined to push her past breaking. One afternoon, under the blistering sun, the class was ordered to hit steel targets at staggered distances across a valley. The wind shifted unpredictably, swirling between ridgelines. One by one, shooters fired, some hitting, some missing, each correction logged by instructors who said little but wrote much. When her turn came, she adjusted her bipod, settled into prone. The instructor leaned down, voice low enough for only her to hear. "Pressure on now, Ghost. Let's see if you're a story or a shooter." Nova didn't answer. She slowed her breathing, eyes tracing the valley. Flags barely stirred, but the tree line whispered. She read the wind not by instruments but by instinct, the same way she had learned to read elk trails in Montana. She fired, the steel rang. She adjusted, fired again, another hit. And again and again. Every round struck, each one a clean clang that echoed across the valley until even the instructor's jaw tightened. She rolled her shoulders, chambered her final round, and fired at the farthest target, a plate barely visible, painted to blend into scrub. The steel sang once more. The silence afterward was heavier than applause. The instructor leaned close again, but this time his voice carried a trace of something unexpected. Respect. Not bad, Martinez, not bad at all. But not bad wasn't enough. The nights were worse. Alone on her bunk, the whispers gnawed at her more than the marches or the tests. You don't belong. They're waiting for you to fail. They'll never see you as one of them. Sometimes she believed it. Sometimes the forest came back in flashes. The RPG fighter, the officer rallying his men, the whispers of her rifle as she bought lives with every pull of the trigger. She had saved them, but here no one seemed to care. One night, unable to sleep, she pulled her phone from her locker. A message from her father waited. "Heard you're in the course. Don't forget, read the silence. Trust what others miss. You've done it all your life." She smiled faintly, the words grounding her. She remembered the way he had taught her to track elk by stillness, by the quiet absence of sound. He hadn't just taught her how to shoot. He had taught her how to notice, and noticing was what had kept her alive. Week 3 was stalking exercises. Candidates were tasked with moving unseen across open terrain, slipping past instructors armed with spotting scopes. Fail, and you were out. The field stretched wide, sun baking the grass, every movement betraying itself. Candidates crawled, slithered, disappeared into brush. Nova moved differently. She didn't just hide. She listened. She watched. She let the environment fold around her until she wasn't moving through it, she was part of it. Hours later, when the horn signaled the end, she rose from concealment only 20 feet from the target. The instructor's spotting scopes had never caught her. The sergeant major shook his head, disbelief flashing across his face. That's impossible. Nova said nothing. By the end of the 4th week, something shifted. The whispers didn't vanish, but they softened. The stares didn't disappear, but they lingered less. Where there had been dismissal, there was now curiosity tinged with respect. And then came the test that broke most: endurance fire. A full day of engagements under punishing conditions. No breaks, no relief. A test designed to see not just who could shoot, but who could sustain precision when every muscle begged for rest. By dusk, most shooters had missed at least once. Even the best faltered under the grind. Nova lay prone, her arms trembling from fatigue, her body screaming. Sweat stung her eyes, her hands ached. The scope blurred, then cleared, blurred again. She wanted to stop. For the first time, she almost wanted to lay the rifle down. They were right, maybe you don't belong here. But then another voice, her father's: don't just look at what's there, look at what's missing. And suddenly she saw it. The stillness in the grass, the gap in the shadows, the subtle shift of the world that told her everything she needed to know. She adjusted, fired, steel sang. And again and again. By the time the test ended, she hadn't missed once. When the instructors posted scores, her name stood at the top. The sergeant major approached, his voice gruff, his expression unreadable. "Martinez, you're changing some minds here." She nodded once. "I'm not here to change minds, Sergeant Major. I'm here to do my job." But deep inside, she felt it, the wall cracking again. The same wall that had stood before her in the forest, the same one she had begun to tear down with each shot. And though she'd never admit it, that mattered. Because respect wasn't given, it was earned, one round at a time. Why was teaching so much harder than killing? Nova stood at the edge of the firing range, the late afternoon sun bleeding orange across the horizon. A dozen candidates lay prone on mats, rifles aligned, scopes trained downrange at distant steel. Their bodies were tense, their breathing uneven, sweat running in rivulets beneath helmets and goggles. And every one of them was waiting for her. She adjusted her cap, arms folded behind her back. She was supposed to speak, supposed to pass down wisdom she'd earned in dirt and blood. But the words stuck. She had always been the one watching silently through glass, her voice barely more than a whisper into a comms unit. Now, silence wasn't an option. The sergeant major who had once doubted her stood nearby, observing. His presence was heavy, a reminder that her place here wasn't universally accepted. She could feel his eyes, measuring her every pause, every breath, waiting for proof she didn't belong. She swallowed, then finally spoke. "You think the rifle is the weapon," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. "It's not. The weapon is discipline. The rifle just carries it out." Some heads lifted slightly, others didn't move. She pressed on. Anybody can fire when the target is clear. The difference between a sniper and a shooter is that a sniper fires when the world is chaos, when the wind lies, when your lungs burn, when your hands shake and men are dying below you. Her voice caught for a fraction of a second. The forest flashed in her memory. The SEALs pinned, their cries over comms, the RPG fighter aligning his shot. Her scope, her finger, 15, 20. The silence after. She steadied herself. Precision under pressure, that's your real job. The sergeant major grunted, show them. Nova dropped prone beside the nearest candidate, taking his spot with fluid ease. She adjusted the bipod, checked the scope, chambered a round. The wind had shifted slightly, subtle but enough. She called it in her head, exhaled, and fired. Steel rang at 600 meters. Again, the sergeant major barked. Nova cycled the bolt, adjusted, fired another hit. And again, each round sang. The students shifted uncomfortably, the rhythm undeniable. She rolled onto her side, set the rifle down, and looked at them. Now you try, and don't tell me about excuses. Tell me about results. For the next hour she moved among them, correcting grips, adjusting stances, pointing out details they had overlooked. Her voice was sharper now, less hesitant. She was still learning how to teach, but in teaching she was also remembering. Mastery was never about glory. It was about repetition, awareness, humility. By dusk, targets downrange bore the evidence of improvement, not perfection but progress, and that mattered. Later, when the range emptied and the students filed out, the sergeant major approached. His expression was unreadable, his arms folded across his chest. "You're not bad with words, Martinez," he said at last. She shrugged. "They don't need words, they need to see." He studied her, then nodded once, slow. "Maybe you're right." It wasn't praise exactly, but it was something. Still, when she returned to her quarters, the weight pressed heavier than the ruck on her back. She sat on the edge of her bunk, unlacing her boots, the quiet gnawing at her ribs. Teaching wasn't like shooting. Shooting was clean. It was angles, math, discipline. Teaching was messy. It was human. It was giving pieces of yourself to others, never knowing if they'd carry them well enough to survive. She pulled the SEAL trident patch from her pocket. The one Brick had given her, its inscription etched into her memory. To Ghost, the sniper who saved Team 7. She turned it in her hands. The men she had saved weren't here. The men she was supposed to save now weren't even in battle yet. But somehow, the responsibility felt heavier. The next weeks blurred into a rhythm. Mornings began with conditioning, afternoons on the range, evenings in classrooms where she broke down ballistics, concealment, fieldcraft. And always the undercurrent, doubt. Some students leaned in, listening closely, eager to absorb everything she said. Others crossed arms, skeptical, muttering under breaths when they thought she couldn't hear. She was a ghost on the battlefield, but here she was very much seen, and not everyone liked what they saw. One evening, after a long day, she overheard two candidates outside the barracks. "She's good, yeah," one said, "but she's not one of us." "She doesn't have to be," the other replied. "She's better." Nova froze in the hallway, the words sinking deep. Better, worse, not one of us. She wanted to believe none of it mattered, that results would speak louder than bias. But in the silence of her room, the old doubts crept back. What if respect here isn't earned? What if no matter how much I prove, it's never enough? The forest came back again. Vance's voice in her ear, full of skepticism, moments before the world exploded. "You'll freeze when the shooting starts." But she hadn't, she never would. The following week, the course culminated in its most brutal test, the final stalk. Students were to infiltrate 2 kilometers of hostile terrain, reach an overwatch position, and deliver a shot within a hair's breadth of perfection. All under the gaze of instructors trying to catch them, scanning for any sign of movement. It was the same test that had broken legends before. Nova didn't just pass, she disappeared. Hours later, when the horn signaled the end, the instructors found her exactly where she wanted to be, within 50 yards of the target, rifle steady, eyes calm. Not a single observer had marked her movement. When the shot cracked, it wasn't just the steel that rang. It was the silence afterward, a silence that said, "There's no denying her now." The sergeant major approached her at the conclusion, his boots crunching on gravel. He looked down at her, then out at the field, then back again. "You were right, Martinez," he said at last. "It's not the rifle, it's discipline, and you've got more of it than anyone I've trained in a long time." She inclined her head quiet. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." He leaned in, his voice lower. "Don't thank me, just keep teaching them. They need you more than they know." That night, as she lay in her bunk, exhaustion draping her like a second blanket, she realized something. The forest had tested her skill, the course had tested her endurance, but this was testing her soul. Being a sniper was about saving lives one shot at a time. Being an instructor was about saving lives before the trigger was ever pulled. And maybe that was the harder mission. She turned the seal patch over in her hands again, running her thumb across the inscription. Ghost, Guardian Angel. Her father's voice came back one more time. Excellence doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she let herself believe it. Why did the recruit remind her so much of herself? Nova stood behind the firing line, arms crossed, watching the newest group of candidates cycle rounds downrange. The sun burned hot on the gravel, brass casings glinting like tiny sparks in the dirt. Most of the shooters were focused, precise, their patterns tight enough to earn nods from instructors. But one, Private First Class Ethan Cole, was different. His shots strayed, wide misses that clanged against steel only by accident. His posture was stiff, shoulders tight, breath ragged. Every mistake bled into the next, a downward spiral of frustration he couldn't seem to break. The other students noticed. Some smirked, some muttered, a few shook their heads. Cole set the rifle down hard after another miss, his jaw clenched. He muttered something under his breath, anger, probably at himself. Nova walked over quietly, crouched beside him. "Breathe." He didn't look at her. "I am breathing." "Not like that," she said softly. "You're forcing it. Slow down, reset." His jaw flexed. "I'm not cut out for this. I know what they're thinking." Her eyes narrowed. "What are they thinking?" "That I don't belong here." His voice cracked slightly. "That I'm dead weight, and they're right." Nova studied him, the slump of his shoulders, the bitterness in his tone, the quiet desperation in his eyes. It was a look she had seen before, years ago, in mirrors, after too many dismissals and doubts. She didn't argue. Instead, she pulled the rifle closer, adjusted the bipod, and lay prone beside him. "Watch." She settled into position, breathing slow, scope steady. She didn't rush the shot. She let him see everything, the calm, the patience, the way the rifle became part of her. Then she fired. Steel rang clean at 600 meters. She rolled onto her side, meeting his eyes. "That's not talent, that's discipline, and discipline is learned." Cole shook his head. "You make it look easy." Nova's voice was low, sharp. "Nothing about this has ever been easy. You think I haven't heard the same whispers? Too small, too weak, doesn't belong. You think I haven't been written off before I even pulled a trigger?" His eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. "I'm here because I refuse to let other people's doubts decide who I was," she continued. "And so are you. You're still here. That means you haven't failed yet, unless you quit." Cole looked back at the target, jaw tight. "And if I never get it right?" "Then you die trying," she said bluntly. "But you don't give up before the fight starts." The words hung heavy. She stood, offered him her hand. "Now get back behind the rifle. You've got rounds left. Use them." He hesitated, then took her hand, pulling himself back into prone. For the rest of the afternoon, she stayed with him, correcting his grip, adjusting his cheek weld, timing his breath. His groups tightened slowly, painfully. By dusk, his last 3 rounds struck steel in clean succession. He lifted his head, disbelief flickering in his expression. Nova nodded once. "That's how it starts, not perfect, not pretty, but progress." The other students noticed too. Their smirks had faded, the mutters silenced. Even doubt had to respect persistence. Later that night, Nova sat alone on the range, the stars glimmering faintly overhead. The smell of cordite still clung to the air, mixing with pine and dust. She thought about Cole, his frustration, his fear of not belonging. She thought about herself years ago, listening to Vance dismiss her in a briefing room. "You'll freeze when the shooting starts." She hadn't, neither would Cole, not if she had anything to do with it. But the question gnawed. How many others had been lost before they ever got the chance to prove themselves? How many voices silenced not by failure in the field, but by the prejudice that kept them from reaching it? She closed her eyes, the weight pressing down harder than any ruck. Teaching wasn't just skill transfer. It was legacy. It was making sure the next soldier didn't crumble under the same doubts she had carried. The next week, the final stalk returned. Candidates were sent into the field, tasked with moving unseen through miles of hostile terrain. Cole looked pale as he adjusted his gear, nerves etched into every movement. Nova caught his eye. "Trust your training, read the silence, you'll see more than you think." He nodded, swallowing hard, then disappeared into the brush. Hours passed. Instructors scanned with scopes, searching for movement. One by one, candidates were caught, flagged, pulled out. The field thinned. But not Cole. Nova tracked him quietly from the instructor line, noting how he paused when the wind shifted, how he hugged shadow when others would have pushed forward. She saw the discipline forming, the patience rooting itself in him. At the end, when the horn sounded, Cole was one of the few who had reached his firing position undetected. His shot rang true, clean against steel. The instructors muttered. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Cole looked back toward Nova, eyes wide, searching for acknowledgement. She gave a single nod, nothing more, nothing less. That night he found her outside the barracks. "You believed in me when I didn't," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Why?" Nova leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Because someone once believed in me when I didn't. My father. The men I saved. Even the ones who doubted me in the end. Belief isn't about being sure. It's about refusing to quit." He swallowed, nodding slowly. She straightened, her tone softer now. "Remember this, you're going to face people who doubt you your whole career. That's fine. Let them. What matters is that you don't doubt yourself." For the first time, Cole smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked away, Nova stayed in the shadow of the wall, her chest tight. She realized then that her role wasn't just to save lives in the field. It was to save warriors before they ever stepped into it. To be the voice she had needed when the room went silent. The forest had made her a legend, but teaching might just make her something more. Because legends die with the stories told about them, but legacies lived on in the people they shaped. She tilted her head back, staring at the stars. Somewhere out there, another ambush would come, another mission would falter, another team would teeter on the edge of annihilation. And maybe, just maybe, one of these students, Cole or another, would be the ghost in the trees when it mattered most. And that, Nova realized, was worth every doubt she'd ever endured. Why did the applause feel so hollow? Nova stood at the small ceremony on base, silver star pinned to her chest, the words of generals and commanders drifting around her like distant echoes. Praise rolled over her, each sentence crafted, formal, polished. They spoke of valor, precision, courage under fire. They spoke of saving 8 men in a forest that had nearly become a grave. But none of it felt real. Not because the words weren't true, but because they weren't the point. The metal glinted against her uniform, heavy in a way no metal should be, but the weight she carried wasn't pinned above her heart. It was inside it. The faces of men she'd saved. The voices of those who hadn't believed in her until the moment she made them. The knowledge that for every mission completed, there were others waiting, others who wouldn't be saved unless someone stood where she had. When the speeches ended and the formation broke, soldiers came to shake her hand. Some with genuine respect, some with curiosity, a few with the kind of awe that still unsettled her. She accepted them all polite, professional, but her eyes wandered past the crowd to the students lined along the back. Cole was among them. His posture was straighter now, his eyes sharper, his presence calmer. He nodded when she caught his gaze. She nodded back. No words needed. Later, when the crowd thinned and the medal was tucked into its case, she walked alone along the range. The evening was quiet, the steel plates downrange catching faint glimmers of fading light. Her rifle wasn't with her, but she imagined its weight, the familiar press against her shoulder, the steady rhythm of breath and trigger. She crouched in the dirt, letting her fingers sift through gravel and dust. Every battlefield smelled the same after the fight: cordite, earth, silence. And every battlefield left its mark, even when the wounds weren't visible. The sealed trident patch was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, turned it over, read the inscription again. To Ghost, the sniper who saved Team 7. She thought of Vance. His doubt turned to respect. She thought of Brick, pressing the patch into her hand. She thought of Doc calling her a guardian angel. And she thought of her father, somewhere back in Montana, who had taught her to read the silence of forests long before the military ever taught her to shoot. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. Saw the ceremony online. Medal looks good, kiddo, but I know you don't need it. You've already proven yourself where it mattered. Proud of you. Always. Nova smiled faintly, her chest tight. She typed back, "It's not about medals, Dad. It's about the ones who came home, and the ones who will because I taught them how." His reply was quick. "Exactly. Dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She pocketed the phone, standing slowly. The words settled into her like the click of a safety, final and absolute. Weeks later, the training cycle ended. Cole and the others graduated, their faces marked by fatigue but also by something harder, sharper. Nova stood off to the side as they received their certificates, her arms folded, her expression calm. She didn't need to be in the spotlight. She never had. When Cole approached afterward, certificate in hand, he paused in front of her. "You were right," he said simply. Nova tilted her head. "About what?" "That it's not talent, it's discipline, and discipline can be taught." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Thank you for believing in me before I did." She nodded once, offering the faintest smile. "Don't thank me, prove me right." He grinned, the kind that belonged to a soldier who had found his footing. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked away, Nova felt something shift inside. Pride, yes, but also peace. This was what legacy looked like. Not medals, not speeches, not even the whispers of rifle fire that had earned her the name Ghost. It was the quiet strength passed on, the resilience forged in someone else because she had chosen to stand where doubt once tried to bury her. That night she sat outside her quarters, the sky above littered with stars. She thought of the ambush in the forest, the blast, the chaos, the desperate voices over comms. She thought of the 15 enemies who had never seen her coming. She thought of the 8 SEALs who lived because she refused to stay silent. And then she thought of Cole, of the students who would follow, of the missions they hadn't yet faced. The forest would always be there, the shadows, the silence, the doubt. But now, there would also be voices carrying forward the lessons she had bled to teach. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes, the night air cool on her face. Somewhere, wind whispered through unseen trees, carrying echoes only she could hear. Sometimes salvation didn't come with a roar. Sometimes it came with the quiet, precise work of a sniper who refused to let others fall. And sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted,